Salamun alaikum. Today, inshallah, we're going to cover a very critical question that is on everybody's mind, and many people have asked me about it. Inshallah, we will discuss it in as much detail as possible. The question is about the story of Yusuf, and we're going to cover specifically one specific aspect of it, and we're going to learn a lot of lessons from it. So the question is, what did Yusuf or Joseph dream about according to the Quran? As you know, I have told you many times that the Quranic stories are dramatically different than those provided by corrupted versions of earlier scriptures. And inshallah, we will cover this in as much detail as we can, to the extent that we can in a very limited amount of time. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. We're going to touch on the interpretation of dreams today, but we're not going to be able to cover a whole lot because there's really not a whole lot to cover, as you will see. So the question is from Surah Yusuf, chapter 12, Surah 12 in the Quran. What did Yusuf dream about? And the quick answer that I usually give you right at the beginning is that there are no dreams in Surah Yusuf, period. I know you're gonna go crazy immediately, but as I promise you, we give you the truth, we give you the interpretation based on the Quranic methodology. We don't make things up, we don't borrow from other sources, we don't try to inspire the Quran by seeing what other people have said. If you go back to the video segment labeled "How much do you have confidence in the Quran?" you will understand the basis for our thinking that all Quranic stories are original. They're different. Otherwise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not have put so much of the real estate of the Quran, so to speak, about 60% of the Quran, if you include all the stories and the metaphors and the parables. 60% of the Quran cannot be just simply copied from other sources. So that's the basic foundation, and the Quran confirms this. And in that video, we cover all of the evidence directly from the Quran to show that the Quran is clearly telling us, don't go there, don't look there, you're not going to find the truth. The Quran has the truth. Quran is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encouraged us to stick with the Quran. All right. It doesn't mean that we don't take from other sources in the Muslim tradition. I'm talking about the stories. The stories are specifically from the Quran, and we're going to see today, inshallah. Now, I said that in Surah Yusuf there are no dreams, period, and that's true. It is absolutely true. I mean, if you really think about it, the whole Quran, outside Surah Yusuf, the whole Quran talks about dreams twice, specifically using the word manam. For example, the story of Prophet Ibrahim, Surah As-Saffat. قال يا بني إني أرى في المنام. I see in the dream. Specifically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, if it is a dream, it's a dream. He tells us it's a dream. In another place, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is also addressed that we showed you in a dream. وَإِذْ يُرِيكَهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي مَنَامِكَ. Allah showed them to you in your dream. But in Surah Yusuf, that word never occurred. For some reason, the scholars, the pious predecessors, whatever you want to call them, decided that Surah Yusuf has 4 dreams, not just 1, not just 2, 4. So the whole rest of the Quran has only 2. Surah Yusuf alone has 4. All right, well, maybe, but we're going to see. The direct answer is, that's not true. There are no dreams, period. And I know what you think, I know what you have been taught, but inshallah you will persist through this presentation, which will be a little bit long, but because we have a lot to cover, and you will see by yourself, inshallah. By the end of this segment, what you'll be able to do is to better understand at least part of the story of Yusuf. We're not going to be able to cover it all. As a matter of fact, we're not going to be able to cover the majority of it. But you have to build some foundation. You have to understand some basic critical concepts that need to be understood before we can unravel the rest of the story. You will be able to better understand the concept of Abrahamic locution. Many of you asked about this, and we keep explaining it. and explicating it, explaining how it's applied, and so on. So, inshallah, you will see this. You will learn how to unravel the hur. Remember, hur, we covered this in another segment that's labeled, Are There 72 Versions? If you look up that segment, if you haven't seen it, please see that one first and see the videos about the Abrahamic locution. And there are 3 or 4 different ones that explain a little bit of the Abrahamic locution. We will also be able to better understand what we mean when we say that the Quran is like software code. And there are a couple of segments about this also. So if you'd like to refer back to those, that's fine, but you don't have to, because you will get to learn, inshallah, in this segment exactly what's the difference between Quran as a concept that has not been present in humanity at all, compared to literature such as poetry, which, as we said before, the interpreters unfortunately assumed the Quran to be like poetry, and therefore they interpreted it in a flat way. And you will see that it's a totally different object. It's a totally different creation by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is absolutely nothing like it. I guess the only thing I can approximate the Quran to is the whole universe. As a matter of fact, the scholars themselves, all the scholars, every single scholar I've read for, and I've been reading for 40 years, every single scholar compared the Quran as Al-Kitab Al-Mastur, the written book or the written scripture, to the whole universe. Al-Kitab Al-Manshur, the exposed kitab, the kitab of the whole universe. And finally, you're going to see a very tragic effect that resulted from the misinterpretation of the Quranic stories specifically. Now, this video is not for entertainment purposes. I advise you to find some quiet time, to find some serious time to pay attention. This is not something you watch just before going to sleep. It has some concepts that may upset some people. It has some controversial results that we're going to discuss, and we invite you to think and reflect about them. You may want to accept them, you may not want to accept them, but that's your choice after you see the evidence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran tells us, قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ. Say, tell them, bring your proof, and we are bringing the proof. And finally, there is a special gift, inshallah, at the end of this video. So the disclaimers that I need to put out there, this is for those who are serious about understanding the Quran. We use the organic methodology that is derived from inside the Quran. Let me repeat it. This is a Quranic methodology derived from inside the Quran. We didn't make it up. Because the Quran is not a human object, no human can come up with that methodology. The methodology has to come up from within the Quran itself. Methodology includes the rules, the steps, the various principles, the instruments, and the general guidance, declarations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put about His methodology within His book, the Quran. It is also important to remember that these explanations are for those people who are able to dissociate from what they learned from corrupted versions of earlier scriptures. And specifically, the story of Yusuf, as is present in our books of tradition, all the books of tradition, every single one of them has literally based their interpretation on a version of the story of Yusuf borrowed from the corrupted version of earlier scriptures. So please make sure you understand this. You have to internalize this concept. These stories that this single story, every one of them tells exactly the same story. And it's exactly the one that matches the one that you find in Genesis in Torah. You need to put that aside in order to really engage the Quran on its own terms, and you will get to see for yourself, inshallah. Finally, this interpretation is based on the Abrahamic locution, as we said. So please make sure you think in that way. Don't think according to the traditional ways of explaining. The rules for interpretation and extracting evidence are totally different within the Abrahamic locution, our method that we use, which is based on the Quran again. So, every scholar in the world, every Muslim scholar in the world, you ask them, what's the best way to interpret the Quran? They immediately tell you, interpret the Quran according to the Quran. And that's exactly what we're doing. So please don't criticize us for doing what every single scholar in the world says we should do, and more importantly, what Allah tells us we should be doing. This is for people capable of critical thinking. If you can't evaluate the evidence, if you just need to rely on somebody else's opinion, somebody with certain types of clothing or whatever, this video is not for you. I apologize, and I really regret this, but I would prefer that you watch with an objective, patient, open-minded type of attitude, so perhaps you can learn something new, inshallah. Finally, please watch the whole video. We've been receiving a lot of comments from people who just watch a part of it and start asking questions before they had a chance to really understand the whole story. So without further ado, we're going to dive directly into one verse of the story, one ayah from the whole surah, because you will see it is so intense, and we'll see inshallah. So the verse, or the ayah, number 4 from, this is wrong, it should be 12. So 12:4. All right, Surah Yusuf, chapter 12. إذ قال يوسف لأبيه يا أبتي إني رأيت 11 كوكبا والشمس والقمر رأيتهم لي ساجدين. The interpretation we're going to give you immediately, and then we're going to detail it. So I need you to be patient. Don't turn off the video. Just be patient and listen and try to absorb as much as you can. And if you have questions after finishing the whole video, please contact us either via email or via comment. And please keep your comments respectful, aligned with the fact that we're discussing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. When Yusuf said to his father, Ya abati, my dear father, it's a beautiful term. I think that there are multitudes of misled blind followers. Now, this is not 11, I know, but we'll see, inshallah. But basically, he's talking about kawkab, and we'll see exactly what the meaning of kawkab according to the Abrahamic locution. So again, you need to be patient until we explain that word. I know it's been translated as planet. By the way, incidentally, I have taught Surah Yusuf for over 30 years. And this is one of my favorite stories and my favorite surahs. And I've studied dozens of sources that told us all sorts of details. It turned out all of them are really imported from the Torah or simply fabricated, literally made up of thin air. No evidence whatsoever for them from the Quran. My dear father, I think that there are multitudes of misled blind followers, people who follow blindly. And I'm also convinced about the Abrahamic symbolism of the sun and the moon. So he's saying, I learned about those things. With the meaning of I think, I understand, I comprehend, from ra'i, from having developed an opinion. I'm convinced, furthermore, that through me, they shall submit in obedience to monotheism. So this is what he's telling his father. Again, this is ayah number 4, okay? So let's analyze it a little bit. Let's unpack it and unravel the hur that we can find in this ayah. So first, we're going to introduce a new concept, something you haven't heard before at all from anybody who interprets the Quran. There's a concept in the Abrahamic locution that we refer to as nesting. Nesting. This is part of the methodology, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us many ways, many hints that we should use the concept of nesting while unraveling. So you take out, it's like somebody described it as like onion skins. You take out the first layer and you discover something else, you take it out and so on until you get to the qurra. If you watch the last video, which is about will Allah expose his leg, we talked about qurra. So qurra is the essence, the heart, the thing that gets stuck to your core, that doesn't leave you after you understand it. Once you grab it, it stays with you. You cannot just let go of it because it's so beautiful and so touching and so real and so connected to the ultimate source of the truth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You will see for yourself. To understand this concept, I'm going to give you an example. So bear with me because I need to position the concept so people can understand it. If you are a software developer, we call this subroutine. So what is a subroutine? I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you're cooking at home and you have a guest, it's a nephew whom you have not seen for 20 years. He's never been to your house for 20 years. He's been traveling overseas or whatever, right? And he's with you and you're cooking and you're making a delicious dish that requires cream, right? And all of a sudden you remember and say, oh boy, we are out of cream. Can you go fetch me some cream? And that nephew runs to the fridge and you look at him and say, what do you mean? We're out of cream. I just said we're out of cream. And he says, oh, I didn't understand. You go through the whole explanation of what you mean by go fetch. Now, let me change the scenario a little bit. Let's say it's your wife or your husband who's the other person. So you're cooking and it's, let's say, your wife who is standing there. Now, I like to cook, so I'm going to use this example. The man is cooking. So the man is cooking and the wife is available and you say, my dear, we're out of cream. Please go fetch some cream. Now, what does she do? She immediately understands she has to get into the car or the bicycle or whatever mode of transportation, maybe walk down to the neighborhood store, and she has to take some money and she has to go enter the store and she has to find the bottle of cream. She has to choose the right brand, the right amount, pay for it, bring it out, and then come back to the house and then deliver it to you on the countertop. That word, go fetch me some cream, includes all of these steps. So everything that she did when she went out to get the cream, so let's say she brought this cream after going through the whole process, that's called a subroutine. So the word fetch, go fetch the cream, implied all of these different steps. Fair enough? So this is the concept of nesting. The Quran uses a single word or a single expression, and it expects you, because you have been going through the Quran and trying to pay attention to everything the Quran says, to understand what this one word or one expression implies. So it is an indirect linguistic reference. It's not a direct linguistic reference. It's not just to a single meaning of that word. It is to the whole subroutine, the whole representative symbolic story that is included in the Quran in relationship to that term. So the word kawkab in the story of Yusuf, verse 4 or ayah 4, is exactly that. It's insider talk. It is the word fetch as that husband and wife understood the word fetch, right? So kawkab for us in this surah includes all of that subroutine. You have to understand what the story about kawkab is. Where? In the Abrahamic locution. So where do we learn about the Abrahamic locution in relationship to kawkab? Most of you who are very studious and knowledgeable about the Quran understand that there is a whole story about kawkab with Ibrahim in Surah Al-An'am, and we're going to see it inshallah. So by referencing kawkab, you need to get into your sort of awareness that now we're introducing a brand new concept, the concept of kawkab in the Quran as defined in the Abrahamic locution. Now, was Yusuf and his father part of the Abrahamic tradition? You betcha. Yaqub was a descendant of Ibrahim, and Yusuf was the son of Yaqub. So definitely, they're talking that type of insider talk. Now, the language of the poets, as you will realize, has nothing to do with it. And what I mean by the language of the poets, the language of the Arab poets. The language of the Arab poets is the basis for all the translations and the interpretations that people have produced regarding the Quran. You will see. All right. So let's look at the story of Al-Kawkab. Now we have to jump. Remember, it's like executing software. Now we stop midway. We need to understand what this Kawkab is. So we're making an outside loop. We're going outside, like that man going to fetch, like that woman going to fetch, right? All of these details. وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ لِأَبِيهِ. This is verse 74 from Surah Al-An'am, which is Surah 6. وإذ قال إبراهيم لأبيه آزر أتتخذ أصناما آلهة إني أراك وقومك في ضلال مبين وكذلك نري إبراهيم ملكوت السماوات والأرض وليكون من الموقنين فلما جن عليه الليل رأى كوكبا قال هذا ربي فلما أفل قال لا أحب الآفلين فلما رأى القمر بازغا قال هذا ربي فلما أفل قال لئن لم يهدني ربي لأكونن من القوم الضالين فلما رأى الشمس بازغة قال هذا ربي هذا أكبر فلما أفلت قال يا قوم إني بريء مما تشركون. To save time, we're going to dive into the translation directly. And thus, Ibrahim said to his father Azar, do you take idols for gods? Verily, I see you and your people in manifest aberration. Now, I underlined this word between parentheses. Remember this. We're going to see it a little later. Okay? It's a very important concept in the process of interpreting the Quran. And thus we gave Ibrahim insight into the mighty dominion, the malakut, the mighty dominion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of the heavens and the earth, so that he becomes of those with certainty. For when the night plunged him in its total darkness, he saw, now remember, up here he was talking to his father. And he's telling his father, you take idols for gods. And in other words, you follow the crowd. And we know from other stories that his father told him, we just follow what we found our forefathers teaching us. They were doing this and we just follow them. We just do like them, right? So part of that story includes the concept that Azar, his father, was just following like a planet goes in its orbit. It follows. As a matter of fact, the word kawkab, as is described in the dictionaries, any dictionary you pick it up, and this is just pure linguistic analysis, from the word wakaba, which is wakaba also, that gerund means to accompany or to stick with or to stay with or to follow. So al-kawkab, as the word in the Abrahamic locution is used, it's something that follows in somebody else's orbit. So what we call a follower or a blind follower, because the kawkab, the planet, cannot really have a choice of getting out of its orbit unless some other influence comes and causes that getting out. So in other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is instructing or has instructed Ibrahim to use that word kawkab in that sense. So when the story is told to us in Surah Al-An'am, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the word kawkab, but he's really referring to his father. So when he saw his father following blindly, he didn't like this. The guidance he was receiving from his father waned, sort of weakened after a while. So فَلَمَّا أَفَلَ, that guidance, that sense of comfort did not stay with him, and he did not like that. He says, I don't like that feeling because he, the father, his belief or his faith, ebbs and flows, increases and wanes and reduces, and so is mine, and I don't like this. I need to be attached to the true God and have a faith or a belief that doesn't change. So he says this kawkab cannot be the source of guidance. And then you know the rest of the story. Then he saw the moon, and it's the same thing. And then he saw the sun, and it's the same thing. Now, he saw literally, physically, because in the middle of the night, he saw the planet, one planet, and that's a question mark, by the way. That tells us the whole story is representative. Because literally, when you're in the middle of the whole night, it's dark. How many planets do you see? Millions of planets. And yet the story tells us one. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sort of pointing out that, look, this kawkab that I'm talking about in here is not what you think. Al-kawkab that he just talked about, which is his father, who follows blindly. Right? So it's not just the real planet. It's one out of millions, meaning he's talking about somebody specific. And that's a signal. That's a hint that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts in all of the stories. And you have to be really observant. Okay, so when the night went really dark, he saw only one. Well, he's talking about one, which is his father in this case. And then later on, he saw the moon, it's the same thing. And then later on, he saw the sun, and it's the same thing. And he just said, whatever I'm looking for cannot be seen with the eye. And that's the whole story from Surah Al-An'am. All right. So Ibrahim went through this story with his followers, including his children, including his descendants. And I'm sure Yaqub and Yusuf studied this story and understood this story. Not only understood this story, understood the metaphorical language used to explain this story. And thus, now we have that subroutine clear in our head. So when Yusuf is talking about planets, plural, he's talking about this type of planets. The planets who are blind followers. All right? Let's go back and see what happens with Yusuf. So when Yusuf said, I find plenty, by the way, in the number 11 is really doesn't mean 11 like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11. In the Quran and in many different cultures, large numbers, anything after 10 represents a large number. And 11 is not really given in here to indicate specific 11. And we will see in a little bit, just be patient and you'll understand more of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to use 11. So he says, I find multitudes of misled blind followers, and I understand the story of the sun and the moon that came from Ibrahim, that came from Surah Al-An'am as far as we're concerned. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us about that subroutine in Surah Al-An'am. If you understand Surah Al-An'am, which by the way is confirmed to have been revealed before Surah Yusuf. And sometimes it's not necessarily that sequence because some things get explained later after something refers to them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept teaching Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the early Muslims to be patient, to wait. And it took 23 years, and some of the stories were really not clarified until much later. We will see inshallah when we get to Surah Maryam, which came early, and then Surah Al-An'am, which came about 10 years later. That Surah Al-An'am explained Surah Maryam and told us the real story in a way that was totally different than what was known at that time. So we will get to that inshallah when we get to Surah Maryam and the story of Isa alayhi salam. All right, so back to this verse. So he's saying, I understand there are so many confused people, blind followers. And by the way, now this is Yusuf as a young boy. Think about this. I am convinced that through me, they, meaning the misled people, they shall be submitting in obedience to monotheism. So this is the young boy who's a student of his father, the Prophet Yaqub. And he is all full of excitement and full of passion for the message, for spreading the message. And he's convinced that he could convince people. So he's telling his father with this youthful pride and energetic passion and excitement for what he learned and how he's able to apply the concepts that we can get these people to follow through monotheism. So this is what that sentence is all about. That's what that ayah is all about. Yusuf is telling his father in the excitement and the youthful pride of a person who's really happy to have learned these concepts, that he knows how to use these concepts. Plus, he wants his career to be in that line. So now we understand the story in a totally different way. It has nothing to do with the dream. Now you say, well, all the scholars said it was a dream. And look, ra'aytu means ru'ya, and ru'ya has been interpreted by major scholars as dream. Let's talk about ra'aytu, this word right here, ra'aytu. And I need you to pay attention because now we're introducing a new concept. So we talked about the first concept, which is nesting. The second concept we're going to talk about is the concept of how to be observant of the spelling. We talked about this in one segment where the title is, why are there spelling variations in the Quran? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to specifically write certain words and certain verbs in certain way. So the word ra'a in the Quran, even in Surah Yusuf itself, occurs in two different ways. And if you trace the whole surah, you learn so much just by noticing these two different ways of spelling. So for example, later on, we're going to see that when the women saw, quote unquote, saw Yusuf, it's spelled this way with the hamza on top of the alif. And when And also, when Yusuf was talking about his dream, so-called dream, it's not a dream, his dream in the sense of inspiration, right? He aspires to this. So he dreams of becoming that. It's not literally a night sleeping type of dream. So his opinion of himself is that he could do that. He could invite people to monotheism, and he's so excited about it. There are other places, for example, I'll go to this and show you, in verse 28, ayah 28. Sorry, I keep using the word verse, but we'll try. In ayah 28, after the story of Yusuf with the Imra'at al-Aziz in her chamber and so on, there's a segment of ayah 28. This is not the whole ayah, I apologize, but we need to be focused. فَلَمَّا رَأَى قَمِيصَهُ, when he saw his shirt. Ra'a is spelled with the hamza sitting on the line. I need you to really pay attention, because this is significant. That discovery by itself unlocked dozens of answers to all sorts of questions about Surah Yusuf when I started working on Surah Yusuf. Incidentally, the methodology requires that before you start coming up with answers, you first identify the questions. With Surah Yusuf, I had over 150 different questions, never before answered. And they didn't make sense according to the traditional interpretation. All right, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to write the Quran this way, ra'a, with the hamza on the line. As we saw in the first verse we reviewed, the first ayah we reviewed, ayah 4, ra'a was on top of the alif, the hamza was on top of alif. So to remember, the hamza on top of the alif is your head, thinking with your head, or kind of seeing with your head. Ra'a with the hamza on the line, on the satr, hamza al-satr, is seeing physical things. So here, he saw his own shirt slit from behind. He saw the shirt. So the shirt is visible, so it's therefore a function of the eye. All right. So I hope this is clear. This is the second concept, and that gave us all sorts of confirmation that Surah Yusuf, ayah 4, was not talking about something physical. It's talking about an opinion that Yusuf formed when he was talking to his father. All right. We're going to introduce a new concept now. The new concept is the interlinked ayats in the Quran. And this is something that not many people have talked about, but I've seen some scholars talk about it, but really they have not exploited it to the point where it allowed us to make so much, to create or to come up with so much understanding, or to receive so much understanding. See, the issue is when you observe and you reflect, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings down the understanding to complement your questions. So you come up with the questions after you observe and you ask Allah for help. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the help. And this is the sequence. This is the repeating cycle that we go through. So what are these interlinked signals? These are faint signals. What I mean by faint signals? Signals that are right there in front of you, but if you're not paying attention, if you're not really attentive and awake when you read, and you're reading with virgin eyes, observing everything, they skip, you miss them. It's sort of like I say, blink and you miss it. And we're gonna see. So it's not for the negligent. It's not for the ghafilun. The Quran refers to them ghafilun. They're absent-minded as they're reading the Quran. They're not paying attention. They're not really all there. After a while, after you practice this beautiful type of signals that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed in the Quran, you develop a sixth sense. You develop some sort of what I call it the tasting the Quran. You're reading it and you say, wait, there's something here. There is something unusual about how this sentence is structured. There's something unusual. I've seen this expression used somewhere else. And there are cases where two verses, many surahs apart, are linked by a single expression, and these two places have these two expressions, and this expression is not used anywhere else in the Quran. It's a beautiful system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has included in the Quran. Nobody has talked about this before, at least as far as I've been able to read. I've seen some scholars talk about the concept, but not really apply it and enclose it within a comprehensive methodology, as we do with the methodology, with the organic methodology of the Quran that uses the Abrahamic locution. So this sixth sense is going to be visible once you practice. And I'm going to give you just a taste of it because the time is really limited. But I want you to appreciate the Quran is full of these beautiful nuggets. Remember, we are in as-sarh, and we are unraveling the verses. We are unraveling the hur, I apologize. And this is how you get to taste. This is how you get to smile. I swear to you, there were times when I get tickled, when I discover, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows me to see a sign that I've missed hundreds of times. Surah Yusuf, I memorize it. I've taught it for 30 plus years. And yet there are signs and signals that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed me to see, and I say, wow, how did I miss this before? And you will see for yourself. Surah Yusuf, number 8. إذ قالوا ليوسف, this is sort of few verses, few ayat later. إذ قالوا, this is the siblings speaking. قالوا ليوسف وأخوه أحب إلى أبينا منا ونحن عصبة إن أبانا لفي ضلال مبين. I underlined لفي ضلال مبين. Now those of you who are paying attention, who are observant, have seen this expression where? In Surah Al-An'am, in the story of Ibrahim with his father, and so on and so forth. Let's go back just to make sure. And I apologize, but I want to highlight it. وإذ قال إبراهيم لأبيه, Surah Al-An'am, right? 74. إذ قال إبراهيم لأبيه آزر أتتخذ أصناما آلهة إني أراك وقومك في ضلال مبين. This is his locution. This is the Abrahamic locution. So when the siblings are using this word, where did they learn it from? It's the insider talk. It's the insider speak within that family. So now we understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us a signal. Remember Kawkab, which you did not understand, was Shams wal Qamar, right? The sun and the moon. Okay, here I'm giving you a signal only for ayah later. These guys are speaking that locution. Go look up what that locution means for Kawkab, for sun, Shams, for moon, and so on. I hope you appreciate how beautiful this is. So what they said, these siblings, the siblings said, Yusuf and his brother are more beloved to our father than we are, even though we are a coterie, meaning a clique. You know, we are together, and Yusuf and his brother are outside of that clique. They're younger, you know, we don't want them to be with us, and so on. And then they continue, surely our father is in manifest aberration, the exact same specific expression used by Ibrahim when he was talking to his father. You see the similarity. Ibrahim was talking to his father. Now these siblings are talking about their father, and they're referring to Yaqub alayhi salam as in manifest aberration. This is the ironic part that should stop you if you're paying attention. It's totally beautiful and right there in front of you, and yet if you're not paying attention, you miss it. Now we have a new concept. As you see, now we understand the beginning of Surah Yusuf, at least that one verse, that one ayah, to mean something totally different. Now, because we discovered that this one ayah is different, this is going to lead us in the right direction for all the rest of the story. Now, what happened to those who started from the very first ayah in the story proper, meaning ayah number 4, but it's really the first ayah in the story, because the first 3 are sort of introductory general instructions. Ayah 4 starts the story of Yusuf proper. If you have come into the Quran, assuming that this is the story of Joseph that I can look up in the corrupted version of the earlier scriptures, you already have in your mind that ayah number 4 is talking about a dream. And not only that, but these planets that are prostrating and so on and so forth all match exactly what went on with the corrupted version of the Torah. So we're safe to go there, all right? Doing that one first misstep misleads you for the rest of the story. Let me repeat it. It's like going down the stairs, tripping on the very first step, you don't know where you end up at the bottom. It's like, the expression that is common, watch for that step, first step. It's a doozy. This first step will take you down the wrong path. You're sort of down the wrong rabbit hole. And once you're there, after that first slip up, it is very hard to pull yourself back up. Right from the beginning of that story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put enough hints that this is just like that one. Hints, they're not real, as we saw. If you're awake, if you're alert, if you're attentive, has nothing to do with that. Right from the beginning, he says ra'a. Ra'a does not mean a dream. But yet, if you insist that this is the same story, in that story, it's a dream. As a matter of fact, it's called the Technicolor Dream Code, or whatever they want to call it, the dream, the Joseph's dream, right? And that's why I put it in the title, because it's the most famous part of the story of Joseph for those who learn the story of Yusuf from the corrupted version of the Torah. If you fall down that first big step, you're down the rabbit hole, and from there on, you cannot pull back yourself. Is this concept my own invention? Let's read. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks exactly about doing this to those who approach the Quran with the wrong assumption. With the wrong assumption, I mean what I said. So if you're starting the Quran with that wrong assumption, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a plan for you. It's a trap. Be careful. Be awake. Here's what this verse, or this ayah is talking about. This is Surah Al-A'raf, number 7, verse, or ayah 146. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, سأصرف عن آياتي الذين يتكبرون في الأرض بغير الحق وإن يروا كل آية لا يؤمنوا بها وإن يروا سبيل الرشد لا يتخذوه سبيلا وإن يروا سبيل الغي يتخذوه سبيلا ذلك بأنهم كذبوا بآياتنا وكانوا عنها غافلين. All right, let's see the interpretation or the translation. I shall distract away from my signs, from my ayat, those who take to interpret the scriptures. By the way, the word ard is part of the Abrahamic locution. Most of the time in the Quran, ard means the scripture. Don't ask me about it now, because that will take some explaining. There are approximately 440 plus ayah in the Quran that use that term, and it took me months of investigation to ascertain that fact. Please accept it from me. Do yourself a favor and accept that this is the result of extensive research. Most of the time, the word ard is not referring to earth or the soil. It's referring to the scripture. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about Khalifa fil ard, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about those who inherit the scripture. We will talk more about this inshallah, but this is a free gift, sort of a bonus for those of you who did not skip already. And those of you who learn to be patient with me, you get these nuggets throughout the videos, throughout the segments. I shall distract away from my signs, from my ayat, those who take to interpret the scripture with arrogance. Arrogance in this case means I know better. I have a previous opinion that I'm going to start with. I know some of this stuff. I don't need to start from scratch. This is arrogance. Because you're approaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we said last time, with your cup half full or full. Doesn't work. When you approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to learn from His signs in the scripture, you have to approach like a poor, deprived person begging for guidance. Your cup has to be totally empty. Your eyes have to be totally virgin. You don't know anything. You're learning things for the first time. That total submissiveness is what leads you to perhaps deserve the mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He will guide you. This is the relationship we have with the Quran. Quran is not something we put on the shelf. Quran is not something we recite in funerals and weddings and to be entertained with Abdul Basit and so on. The Quran is word by word striving to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His guidance. And the rewards are absolutely amazing. The story of Yusuf that we will cover inshallah over the time is stunning, is beautiful, is so full of information and wisdom and philosophy and guidance on leadership and guidance on state security and guidance to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam how to run a state, who to watch out for, how to worry about certain cliques, how to worry about certain people who may stab you in the back. How do you look for evidence? Full, tons of information. I have over 80 pages written just on the translation of Surah Yusuf. And inshallah in due time we will release it. We'll go back to the verse, to the sign. Ayah 146. I shall distract away from my signs those who take to interpret the scripture with arrogance, ignoring the truth, بغير الحق, holding on to something other than what Allah calls al-haq. Al-haq in the eyes of Allah for us is the Quran, nothing else. Nothing else. Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam, my honorable leader, I would be honored to be his doormat. But when it came to the Quran, he was learning from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were telling him. And the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were telling him, be patient, don't rush, and ask Allah for guidance. And so thus we learn the same way. We ask Allah for guidance. When they ignored the truth, they started and approached the Quran assuming they already knew the bulk of the story. They started on the wrong foot. That first step, ayah number 4, they slipped and went down the wrong rabbit hole. Watch what happens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues in ayah 146. If they see every sign, they will not believe in those signs. So when they read the rest of the Surah Yusuf, they already had formed an opinion. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stopped allowing them to see His signs. You want to have it your way? Go ahead and do your own interpretation based on the fabricated story that you started with. And that's what they did. Every single one of them. And they admitted it. All of them admitted that this story has been reported in, quote unquote, the Torah that was available to them. Every single time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about the people of the Torah, He told us they corrupted it. And yet the interpreters insisted, this is where we're going to get the story. And therefore they retrofitted the Torah version of the story on top of the Quran. The Quran was no longer their primary source. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prevented them from seeing His signs. It doesn't please me to tell you this, but this is a reality I'm showing you in front of your eyes. This is what these verses are telling us. This is what these ayat. And if they see the way of finding the correct direction, sabil al-rushd, they will not adopt it. And if they see the way of finding the wrong direction, Allah told you those earlier scriptures have been corrupted. No, I'm going to go get the story from there. I challenge anyone to find a single interpretation, tafsir, that does not use the exact story from the Torah. As a matter of fact, some people took pride that we're not going to accept fabricated details. We're going to restrict ourselves to the details from the Torah. And I can name names. As a matter of fact, there is one interpreter, one book of tafsir. When he came to the story where it started talking Al-Malik, the king, in his tafsir, and I can show you. So don't challenge me because I know what I'm doing. I've studied this surah for 30 years and I taught it for 30 years the wrong way until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened my eyes. When that interpreter came to the story of the king and the first mention of the king, he opened parentheses and he said, meaning Pharaoh. So instead of leaving the word al-Malik in his interpretation, he started using Fir'aun. The Quran never talked about Fir'aun with the story of Yusuf. That famous, very famous interpreter, he's one of the major scholars about ulum al-Quran. And anybody who challenges me, I will point you to that source. Very famous interpreter. When he got to al-Malik, he opened parentheses, meaning Fir'aun. We know better. Arrogance. So don't tell me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not warn us. He warned us. But there are some people who approach the Quran with no submissiveness. They refuse to come with an empty cup. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell them, I'll leave you to yourself. And as a result, not only you mislead yourself, you mislead the millions who have followed them in the last 1400 years. The rest of this ayah, if they see the way of finding the correct direction, which is spelled out clearly in the Quran, they will not follow it. They will not adopt it. If they see the way of finding the wrong direction, they will embrace it. They will adopt it. That is so because, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing this? Because they belied our sign. They belied our signs. كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا. How did they belie the signs? In Surah Yusuf itself, as I told you in the video segment, which title is How Much Confidence Do You Have in the Quran? I recited to you the very first ayah is ayah 12:102. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us at the very end of this story, of this surah, ذَلِكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الْغَيْبِ. This is reports that nobody knows. And yet they said, no, we know this stuff. It's coming from the Torah. So we're going to go there and sort of peek and look at the Torah and bring it and kind of shortcut the whole concept, the whole process. That is so because they belied our signs, our ayat, and they were inattentive to them. They were dismissive. So when they read verse 102, ayah 102, it must mean something else. And they skipped over it. Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil. So why did they represent or misrepresent Surah Yusuf? They started with the wrong foot with the very first ayah in the story proper, ayah 4. The pious ones decided it was a dream about his 11 brothers and his father and his mother, and I have no clue how planets would prostrate in a dream. You tell me, if any of you, please write me in the comment. How do planets prostrate in a dream? You tell me. I couldn't figure it out. When I came to translating it, I thought, okay, well, planets are prostrating. What does that mean? I can't even visualize it. I can't even put an image to it, not even in a cartoonish way. What does that mean? Planets are prostrating. And yet they accepted it. Hook, line, and sinker. Misleading millions, if not billions, of Muslims. May Allah forgive them and forgive us. Maybe they tried. Maybe they didn't think. Maybe they were not paying attention. وَمَا قَدَرُوا اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ. They did not ascribe to Allah His due reverence. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a light matter. It's not something you undertake lightly when you're dealing with His signs and His words and His scripture. This is divine information. You take it with full seriousness or don't take it at all. If you don't understand, if you don't want to say anything, you don't know what to say anything, stop and say nothing. There is one scholar, by the way, and I don't want to tell you names even though I have all of these sources and references. He's a modern scholar. May Allah be pleased with him and forgive him. He refused to follow in the path of those mufassirun. He says something doesn't smell right. And I'm not going to take from the Torah story. And when he came to Surah Yusuf, all he could do is talk about 13 verses, 13 ayah. That's it. Out of 111 ayah in Surah Yusuf, he talked about 13 ayah and he stopped. This is piety. This is discipline. This is this is taqwa. He understood he's dealing with something very serious. He refrained from saying anything other than these 13 ayah that he could understand. He says the rest I don't understand. So he stopped. He didn't talk. And you find in his tafsir that he talks about these 13 ayahs and then he has sort of fluffy notes on the rest, but no real explanation. And he just left it at that. And you look at it and it's a clear gap in his tafsir. But perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prevented him from falling down that first step. That first ayah 4. He didn't take the wrong road and therefore prevented him from falling down the wrong rabbit hole. Now, you think this is serious? Let me show you even more. This is the closing, inshallah. In a couple of minutes we will wrap up. This is the real tragedy for us. As a brother of mine told me, we are in deep, deep trouble. And it's even more than you think. It doesn't please me to tell you this. And please don't take it against me. I'm only sharing with you what's in front of your eyes. I'm asking you to pay attention. Wake up. Listen. Learn what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us. And then you judge. Look at this ayah from Surah Al-Furqan. وقال الذين كفروا إن هذا إلا إفك افتراه وأعانه عليه قوم آخرون فقد جاءوا ظلما وزورا وقالوا أساطير الأولين اكتتبها فهي تملى عليه بكرة وأصيلا. This is addressing the disbelievers and how they dealt with our beloved Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. They said, the disbelievers, this Quran is nothing but lies that he concocted, he invented them, and with which others helped him. أعانه عليه قوم آخرون. Others have helped him put this together. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes that first ayah with his conclusion, telling us how to think about this. They have brought forth transgression and false testimony. Zur, testimony that is false, lying. And then the next ayah. And they also said, these are the writings of people of old, which he had someone write down for him. And they are dictated to him or upon him mornings and evenings. Now I know my Arab brothers are going to jump all over me because this word, the writings or asatir, means, in their opinion, according to their dictionaries and their translations and their interpretations, they all interpreted as fables, myths. But the word from the Quran, if you look up the word from the Quran, such as in Surah Noon, Al-Qalam, Noon wal qalam wa ma yasturun. This is ayah number 1. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he's swearing Noon by the pen and what they write. Yasturun, the same gerund, satara. So asatir is from yasturun, satara, which means the writings. So these disbelievers, Allah is telling us, these disbelievers accused Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam that he is bringing the writings of other people and someone is reciting them to him day and night. Who? The opponents of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam in his life. And the Quran is recording this for us so that it is not up to those who transmitted these narrations whether or not they will tell us. Allah himself told us. This is what happened to your prophet during his life. Alright? So what did our esteemed pious predecessors do? They confirmed this. They did exactly what the Quran said Muhammad's opponents were doing. They said, oh yeah. We're going to get these same stories from those other books. If you're feeling pain in your stomach right now, you have the right to. If you're not feeling it, there's something that you missed. You didn't understand what I talked about. You should feeling that pit in your stomach, that sort of peach sitting here, that pain, that agony. that sorrow, that sadness that should engulf you for the millions of people who have been misled by this wrong approach our so-called pious predecessors took. Don't ask me why. I have no idea. I'm just sharing with you the facts. I explained to you why they did it, how they did it, how they took that wrong first step and tripped down the rest of the steps. And every single commentator and explainer of the Quran doing tafsir followed exactly in the same path. And we take pride in making movies and series. One of the most popular right now in the whole Arab world, the most popular Arabic series ever produced was the story of Yusuf according to this wrong interpretation. Quran, no, put it aside. We know better. Subhanallah. I ask you to take a while to reflect. Embrace this pain, embrace this sorrow. When I first discovered this, I was sick for 3 full weeks, literally sick, throwing up, unable to move, unable to live, because I taught their story for 30 years. Alhamdulillah, I didn't have that broad of a reach during those years. But I made a commitment when I recovered from my sickness, I will not die before correcting my mistake. And that's why I'm sharing this with you. I ask you to reflect, think, allow this to sink in, feel the sadness, feel the sense of loss. Yes, embrace it. Detoxification is always painful. But most of all, don't take it against the messenger. I'm not the one who caused this problem. Don't misplace your anger against me. Misplace your anger against Shaitan, who has caused this confusion. But now we have a chance to fix it. This is the good news. We have an opportunity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in front of us. You know, many people ask me, why now? Dr. Hani, why now? Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealing such dramatic change compared to the last 1400 years? I say, I don't know, but perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us a chance to fix it. We have a lot of work to do. I just barely scratched the surface with one verse, one ayah number 4. The rest of the story is so magnificent. The Quranic story it's just so beautiful that they deprived us of these nuggets and jewels that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deposited in the Quran. Now, alhamdulillah, you're able to better understand at least the beginning of the story of Yusuf. Better understand the concept of the Abrahamic locution. You're able, hopefully, to better understand how we unravel the hur. And you saw it's a complicated process. It's laborious process. It's jihad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls it so. In the last verse of Surah Al-Ankabut, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those who strive in our way. We just read about the way of Sabil al-Rushd. We shall guide them to our way. So it's a strive, it's a challenge, it's a lot of work, hard work, yes, because you're engaging the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many of you have commented, well, the Quran should be easy to understand. Yes, there are some ayat that are easy to understand. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ is easy to understand. That's elementary school level type of complexity. But there are some ayat that are really complex and takes super studiousness and persistence and sincerity. And if you unravel those hur, you will be in paradise. You will be in Jannah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about. Very importantly, I showed you with the concept of the nesting that we use in this methodology that the Quran is a lot more like software code than poetry. Poetry is flat. Poetry, you interpret one verse at a time, one word at a time, no problem, you keep going. You don't have this sort of nesting. With the Quran, there is nesting. Has nothing to do with poetry. If I bring a software program to you, and I used to be a software programmer, and you just translate it or interpret it as if it's poetry, you're a fool. This is stupid. Don't interpret the Quran as if it's poetry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us this is not poetry. Surah Shu'ara is all about that. Surah 26. And yet, that's exactly what they did. Did they have the concept of nesting? Absolutely not. The concept of Abrahamic locution, although the evidence is right there, absolutely not. So don't ask me why they didn't do it. Ask them. Don't ask me why now. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses the timing. Don't ask me why me. I have no idea. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses. My job is to put it in front of you. Tabligh, to deliver, to express it. And let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do His magic in your heart. If your heart is open, if your cup is not totally full, you will receive. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He will open our heart and allow us to receive all the wisdom and all the guidance that's enclosed in the Quran. The gift that I promised you. Remember ra'a and ra'a. And remember I told you if the hamza on top of the alif, that means with your head, it's an opinion. And if the hamza is on the line, it's with your own eyes, it's physical seeing. Now, when the women in the story of Yusuf, in Ayah 31, the famous segment where they cut off their hands and all of that stuff, right? Incidentally, that's not from the Torah. That scene is purely Quranic, and our scholars, mashallah, did their part to embellish it with all sorts of imaginative details that are absolutely not warranted or justified or expressed in the Quran. Among the things is that they saw Yusuf as this fantastically beautiful human being, and they went gaga, went at the knees, and they started cutting off their hands without feeling it, as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to present to us some sort of, subhanallah, a silly story like this. When you understand the concept of ra'a with the hamza on top of the alif, you look at that verse, at that ayah, and you understand they saw him with their opinion. There is an opinion there. That means there's some intellectual conversation that went on. Has nothing to do with the physical beauty of Yusuf. By the way, Yusuf had nothing to do with physical beauty. In the Quran, the whole Quran, you don't find a single reference to Yusuf's beauty. The Prophet ﷺ, in one narration, he's reported to say Yusuf was given Shatra al-Husn, half of al-Husn. And they understood it to mean beauty, because some people, that's the only place where their head goes. The Prophet ﷺ was not talking about beauty, talking about husn in a different meaning that we will see when we get to Surah Yusuf in full. So these women engaged Yusuf with some preaching and intellectual conversation he was making with them, and they appreciated his opinion, and they took his side in the conflict. We will see, inshallah. This is the gift special for you. And the proof, ra'aynahu, the way it's spelled this way. Akbarnahu, that means they valued his opinion. They considered his opinion correct. And by the way, this is the same word that we use when we say Allahu Akbar, dominant over everybody else and everything else. Finally, we don't forget this dua. Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana li hadha wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. Laqad ja'at rusul rabbina bil haqq. Praise be to Allah who guided us to this, and we were never to be guided were it not for His direct guidance. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you the direct guidance. You have to ask for it and be sincere. I invite you to continue with me on this journey. We enter as-sarh. We explore the beauty and the science, this new science of learning about the divine text. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me if I make mistake this time or in my prior life where I taught the wrong version of this story. And I ask you all to support this channel by subscribing, liking, sharing, and please include comments, any comment you want, in a polite manner, open-ended type of questions, not the type of questions that you assume you already know the answer. Ask the question in an open-ended way, expecting to receive some new information. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, due to your modesty, will give you the information you're requesting. Thank you very much for watching. Salamun alaikum.